So putting some numbers on that information. This is 5th to the 6th of April 2011 is where it all began. And this was National Grid's analysis of their first difficult night in managing wind generation. What you see here, this is a National Grid slide, is how National Grid stacks up its options to turn things down. So essentially what they've got is a set of price options on coal, gas, hydro, wind to turn generation down. And as you move up the y-axis, you see the amount of megawatts that they can have at each individual price. So what they do is they will turn down the cheapest first, and then they will move to the next cheapest. At the bottom left, you can see, for example, that on that particular night there was some coal generation that was willing to turn down for a positive price. That means that generator was willing to pay to switch off, and the reason it's willing to pay to switch off is that it retains the coal in the yard, and that has value. So that's very cheap for grid, so they do that. And then there's some coal and some gas that's willing to turn off for free. So for no payment in either direction. But some of it can't. Some of it is referred to as sterilized. National Grid needs to hold that plant, or there are environmental reasons why a hydro plant has to run. So as the requirement for footroom increases, National Grid has to choose ever more expensive options. And then you're into negative prices. This is National Grid paying to get rid of electricity, turning off hydro, and then wind. And this is, in fact, because of the volumes that they had to skip over, National Grid ended up paying £800 per megawatt hour at the top end for reduction in energy generation on that particular night. Had they had to buy more volumes, you'd have been talking about £10,000 or £100,000 per megawatt hour to turn off. So that's where it began, and that's the event that generated the first slew of headlines about this. Moving on, every September, wind output records are broken, and this was one particular night when storms occurred in the middle of September. This is National Grid's operational view. This is how they see and plan for a footroom event. What you're looking at is 5 days prediction of wind farm output across GB, with the bands, the blue bands reflecting degrees of confidence. And so where the bands are spread, it means they're less confident of the result. So 5 days ahead, their confidence obviously is fairly low as to whether or not their wind forecast is correct. But nevertheless, you can see that there's a definite storm event that has to be planned for at least. And on top of the storm event, there's a possibility that the wind farms will shut themselves down to protect themselves from the storm. So there's a risk of both high generation and sudden drops. That requires both positive and negative reserve. It requires both headroom and footroom at the same time. As time rolled on, 24 hours ahead of the storm, their confidence in their forecasts increased. In fact, they were pretty sure there was going to be a big storm, and there was. They became also more confident that the wind farms would stay on. So that's just to do with the wind speeds and their relationship to the capabilities of the wind farms. And at this point, they're buying footroom. This is where National Grid starts to say, we need to make some deals here in order to get some of the generation under our control and indeed turned down, otherwise we can't get through the night. And they did that. And in fact, here is what they did in this next slide. You can see that when the storm came, this is the peak of green here, showing you the level of wind generation. You can see that round about 11 p.m., perhaps a little bit earlier in the evening, they started to turn off. Actually, eventually quite large volumes of wind were turned off in that particular event. The yellow is deliberate turn down on the fly by National Grid. You can see, in fact, the yellow continues for quite a considerable period of time. There's turn down going on right the way through into early Sunday morning. This was a fairly big event. But these happen, storms happen. And National Grid required both upward and downward regulation, both positive and negative reserve, to get through it. More recently, just another way of looking at the data. This is a log of the financial and energy transactions that National Grid used in one particular instant. This was the 11th of January. It was 4 a.m. And what you can see here is the stack of purchases or sales, if you like, that National Grid made of electricity to turn down generation. What you can see here on the top left, you can see the code of Thanet Wind Farm 1 and 2. So there are two halves to that. And Thanet Wind is being paid £150 per megawatt hour to turn down in that half hour. The other options that National Grid took at the time are also listed, and they include Drax, Eggborough, Ferrybridge, and so forth. The majority of these are in fact coal power stations, although there's some gas in there as well. And these were turned down at positive prices, which meant those power stations paid to turn down and made profit on holding the coal in the yard, essentially. But this is an event where so a large wind farm was turned off for quite a high cost. The interesting thing on the top right here that you see is that there was a tagging that went on with the wind volume that was turned down at Thanet, and the reason for that is that this was driven by locational issues in the southeast of England. Locational issues are dealt with differently in settlement, and that is how we know that this is what was driving that particular event. You can dig through this database and find many dozens of instances of wind farms being turned down at different prices, and we do that. We have quite a thorough log of these. And in fact, from that log we derive a nice set of averages. This is over probably three and a half years, where we've got averages of the frequency and the volume of wind turn down events. What this tells you is that it's actually quite common for wind to be turned down right through the day. Any hour of the day there can be a wind turn down event. But the greatest volumes, and therefore of course the greatest costs, occur at night. So that's the peak of the blue on the left here, which is roughly twice as big as it is during the rest of the day. So adding all of that up, month by month, you can see what National Grid is spending on Footroom, and you can see how that's changed over time. The green is the volume of megawatt hours that were turned down, and the blue is the cost of that. Towards the left here, you see the early days when National Grid started doing this. The wind farms weren't expecting it and weren't ready for it. There were instances, for example, of National Grid phoning up the operational contact that they had for a particular wind farm and discovering that it was the phone number of somebody who was in Denmark and in bed, asleep, and wasn't expecting to be the operational contact. And that sort of thing resulted in poor delivery, problems, and at the other side, the wind farms had not been expecting this, and in fact had posted prices that they thought were high enough to make National Grid go and look somewhere else, which obviously contributed to the high costs and the negative publicity. More recently, it's tended to settle down. The wind farms have upskilled. They have taken a good hard look at the economics, and if they're onshore, 80 to £100 tends to be the prices that they're charging. Offshore it's higher, but still that's £2 million a month consistently through this one route of procurement. National Grid has other routes of procurement for turning down wind farms as well, in fact, which are the subject of bilateral contracts. This is the volume that we can see. This is the volume that's costing £2 million a month.